Somebody said 911, please.
What's going on there? Why are the officers needed?
Somebody shot my wife.
And me and my wife, we was out in the house, we came outside, we was talking and everything. And then when I came back, I pulled right there. And when I looked, I saw she was slumped over.
In May 2010, in the city of Houston, Texas, residents living around the Greenlock Lane area still held a special respect for the family of Reverend Tracy Burleson. In his early 50s, Tracy wore the dignified cloak of a spiritual leader.
God blesses you above, exceedingly above what you can imagine.
Frequently standing at the pulpit to convey teachings on benevolence, family morality, and fidelity. Living by his side was his longtime wife, 53-year-old Pauletta Burleson, a devoted, hard-working woman who served as a steadfast pillar of support for her husband. However, behind the walls of prestige and that perfect religious facade lay a quietly fracturing family. Also living in that home was their 21-year-old son, William Fuller, a young man taking his first tentative steps into adulthood under the overwhelming shadow of his father. Not a single person in the poor Houston neighborhood at the time could have suspected that inside that perpetually closed house existed a grim web of relationships, riddled with deception and sick secrets that were gradually being buried. The moral decay began when Reverend Tracy Burleson became immersed in an extramarital affair with Tyone Palmer. When his wife, Pauletta, discovered the truth, she refused to compromise and threatened to expose her husband's true face to the church and the public. Fearing the loss of his reputation, social standing, and specifically wanting to claim the full $60,000 life insurance payout under his wife's name, Tracy devised a vicious plot. Instead of getting his own hands dirty, the man who bore the title of spiritual leader decided to manipulate his own biological son, William Fuller, turning his flesh and blood into a murder weapon. On the evening of May 18, 2010, the cold-blooded plan was officially triggered. Tracy lured Pauletta out to the walkway outside the courtyard with a prearranged excuse to lower the victim's vigilance. As Pauletta stepped out into the darkness of the front porch, William Fuller lay in wait with a handgun in hand. Without a shred of hesitation toward the person who gave him life, William pulled the trigger, shooting his birth mother straight at close range. The gunshot tore through the quiet night in the Houston neighborhood, ending the woman's life in a pool of blood before the perpetrators quickly fled the scene. At the moment the gunshot rang out and tore through the night on Greenlock Lane, Reverend Tracy Burleson himself was the one who directly picked up the phone to call the 911 emergency line of the Houston Police Department. In the recording of the call, his tone tried to act panicked, urgently reporting a sudden attack and calling for an ambulance to save his wife. When authorities and the ambulance arrived at the scene, surrounding neighbors gathered outside the police tape with shocked expressions, curious to know what had happened to the respected pastor's family. Not a single one of them knew that the dramatic plea for help was actually just a flawless play staged by the mastermind himself to cover up the heinous crime he had just committed. The Houston Police Department, HPD, patrol team quickly arrived at the house on Greenlock Lane after receiving the emergency report. As soon as they stepped out of their cruiser, the officers immediately cordoned off the entire surrounding area with police tape, setting up a security perimeter to prevent onlookers from entering. The flashing lights from the patrol cars cast reflections against the dark walls of the residential area, completely shattering the silence of the night. Approaching the walkway near the porch, officers noted that the victim, Pauletta Burleson, was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Upon conducting a quick check for vital signs, medical personnel determined that the victim had died before rescue teams could reach her. Immediately, the professional instincts of seasoned investigators began to awaken. They noticed abnormal signs that did not match a typical robbery burglary. No struggle, no forced entry, and all of the victim's expensive personal belongings and valuables remained intact on her body. It was this lack of logic that immediately triggered deep suspicion among law enforcement, transforming what initially looked like an accident into the sign of a meticulously calculated murder. On the night of May 18, 2010, the forensic team from the medical examiner's office, along with Houston crime scene investigators, proceeded to collect all physical data in the walkway area outside the house. The thorough lockdown and on-site screening recorded spent shell casings ejected from a handgun, scattered at close range from where the victim had collapsed. Forensic technical experts mapped the scene, dusted for fingerprints, and photographed every angle of the blood spatter on the concrete ground to analyze the trajectory angle. The autopsy results, released by the legal authorities, determined the cause of death for Pauletta Burleson to be multiple gunshot wounds causing fatal internal organ damage. The forensic process also estimated the time of death to coincide perfectly with the time frame when the emergency call was made. The autopsy report confirmed that the bullets were fired from close range, ruling out the possibility of a stray bullet or accidental discharge, further reinforcing the conclusion that this was a targeted execution. At this point, all the physical clues and forensic data just collected were transferred directly to the desks of the specialized detectives to begin. Immediately after completing the initial evidence collection, the Houston Police Department, HPD, officially shifted to the phase of expanding the investigative case. Initially, investigators had to consider all plausible hypotheses, including the possibility of a nighttime break-in robbery, a personal social grudge, or a random attack by strangers roaming the neighborhood. However, through a rigorous screening process, the hypothesis of a robbery homicide was quickly ruled out entirely. The reason was that all of Pauletta's valuables, wallet, and jewelry were still intact on her body, and there were no signs of forced entry or disturbed property inside the house on Greenlock Lane. When external directions were eliminated, the investigative force began narrowing the scope of suspicion to internal relationships, focusing directly on those living with and closely connected to the victim. Detectives proceeded to collect and analyze digital data, including call logs, text messages, and communication history from personal mobile devices related to the Burleson family. Through parsing hundreds of digital data points, they discovered an abnormal truth. A massive volume of dense calls and text messages exchanged continuously between Reverend Tracy Burleson and a woman named Tyon Palmer, taking place throughout both before and right after the time of the murder. Not stopping there, the financial and social relationship investigation continued to reveal a very clear motive. Detectives discovered the existence of a life insurance policy under the name of Pauletta Burleson, in which Reverend Tracy Burleson was the primary beneficiary, with a sum valued at approximately $60,000. At the same time, the initial statements of the pastor himself, along with Tyon Palmer, began to show fatal contradictions, mismatched in timeline, and exposing fabrication in the milestones of events they deliberately manufactured to serve as an alibi. To further strengthen the overall picture, investigators continued to expand the verification of relationships surrounding the family, thereby discovering the presence of a complex, suspicious communication network featuring 21-year-old son William Fuller. Connecting the digital data, insurance financial statements, and inconsistencies in the statements of those involved turned this group into the sole focal point of the investigative spearhead, completely eliminating other vague speculative directions. Once the digital data and financial analysis closed off all avenues of escape, Houston city authorities officially entered a phase of firm action. One morning in Houston, tactical teams coordinated with detectives from the Houston Police Department, HPD, to simultaneously deploy a plan to capture the suspects at the center of suspicion. Emergency arrest warrants were approved by the court for Reverend Tracy Burleson, son William Fuller, and lover Tyon Palmer. At different locations across the city, police suddenly swarmed in to neutralize and completely strip each suspect of any chance of escape. When the handcuffs were snapped onto their wrists, the reactions of the evildoers revealed clear panic and surprise. Reverend Tracy tried to maintain a calm expression, using his religious cover to loudly deny the accusations and demand his personal rights before the officers. Meanwhile, son William Fuller quickly suffered a psychological collapse, no longer maintaining the coldness he had at the time of the crime, while Tyon Palmer adopted an uncooperative attitude, continuously dodging camera lenses and questions from law enforcement. Inside the cold interrogation room of Houston Police Headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. Confronted by seasoned investigators, Reverend Tracy Burleson initially tried to cling to his deceitful facade, coldly denying any involvement and loudly demanding a lawyer. However, the sharp tactical methods of the police did not allow him to drag out the act. They continuously placed on the table the $60,000 insurance financial statements and dense call logs between him and his mistress. In contrast to the seasoned nature of the father, the psychological state of the son, William Fuller, quickly collapsed under interrogation pressure. When investigators rolled out undeniable, ironclad proofs, William's defense wall completely disintegrated. Amid choking sobs and extreme panic, William bowed his head and confessed the entire truth. "My father and Tyone forced me to do it. They told me I had to murder my mom." This shocking testimony became the final piece of the puzzle, completely smashing the evasive sophistry of the wrongdoers. The prosecution authority from the Harris County District Attorney's Office compiled and consolidated a solid legal file without any loopholes before transferring the case to the formal prosecution phase. The core of the evidence system lay in the highly authentic physical evidence and digital data painstakingly gathered by investigators. The first key piece of evidence was the handgun identified as the direct murder weapon, along with shell casings recovered at the scene outside the house on Greenlock Lane. Through intensive ballistics testing, the mechanical marks on the shell casings matched the structure of the gun used and hidden by the group. Additionally, digital forensics experts successfully extracted the entire system of call logs and text messages stored in the suspects' mobile phones. This digital data exposed a dense communication network, clearly showing discussion and detailed planning between Reverend Tracy Burleson and his lover Tyone Palmer prior to the murder. The next important legal anchor was the $60,000 life insurance policy in the name of the victim, Pauletta Burleson, in which the sole legal beneficiary recorded was the husband, Reverend Tracy. This financial document served as the perfect piece, proving a clear motive for money and personal gain. The perfect combination of physical traces from the weapon, undeniable communication data, and transparent financial records created a comprehensive picture of the crime. These ironclad grounds completely convinced prosecutors to transfer the case to the high criminal court to bring the entire group of masterminds and accomplices out into the light of justice. The trial for the shocking murder took place at the Harris County Courthouse in Texas under an extremely stuffy and tense atmosphere. Before the dock, the defense attorneys for Reverend Tracy Burleson continuously found ways to cling to procedural technical details, trying to paint a picture of a spiritual leader who was framed and blamed for another's panic. However, in stark contrast to that weak sophistry, the state prosecutors stepped up to the podium with an iron resolve, stripping away each layer of deceitful facade with sharp reasoning, logical arguments, and a firm attitude to protect justice for the departed woman. When the presiding judge of the court loudly read the verdict, the entire courtroom fell into absolute silence. The vicious act of the husband utilizing a religious cover to manipulate his biological son into taking his wife's life for insurance money was completely exposed to the light of the law, with no room left to deny. The harshest sentence was handed down to close the crime. Mastermind Tracy Burleson received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, permanently stripped of his freedom behind iron bars. The one who directly pulled the trigger, son William Fuller, received a 30-year prison sentence for cooperating sincerely, while accomplice lover Tyone Palmer served a 20-year prison sentence. The life sentence without the possibility of parole for Reverend Tracy Burleson closed one of the cases that caused strong public shock in the city of Houston and across the state of Texas. The residential community in the area where the victim's family lived received this outcome with shock and utter outrage. The incident not only rang alarm bells about moral decay behind a fake religious facade, but also left deep sorrow and extreme loss for Pauletta Burleson's family, those who had to bear the horrifying trauma of having a loved one's life taken by their own flesh and blood close beside them. Among the public and legal experts, there was virtually no controversy regarding the severity of the sentence. The majority agreed that the verdict of the Harris County Court was entirely deserved, serving as an appropriate punishment for an organized, cold-blooded crime that ran counter to moral standards. The case closed as a stain difficult to wash away in the local community. while serving as a painful reminder of the fragile boundary between human greed and degeneration. The life sentence without parole for the mastermind, 30 years for the son who directly acted, and 20 years for the accomplice lover, concluded one of the most haunting cases. Yet, behind that ruling, lingering echoes remained regarding human degradation. In your opinion, was this sentence truly fair for what the victim had to endure? Was the sentence given to the son too light? Or was this the appropriate price for someone who was manipulated? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Looking back at the entire tragedy at the house on Greenlock Lane, what lingers is not just the eeriness of a meticulously calculated crime, but the ultimate collapse of foundational values that once seemed the most solid. Reverend Tracy Burleson's case is a chilling wake-up call about how greed, selfishness, and personality degradation can turn human beings into such callous machines. When fame, money, and personal lust are placed above all else, sacred concepts like faith, marital loyalty, and maternal love can be discarded without mercy. Behind the dignified facade of a spiritual leader lies the clearest proof of the danger of social masks. Modern society sometimes places too much trust in those who know how to wear a glamorous exterior, then neglects to see through the psychological shadows and silent degeneration within. Even scarier is the way psychological manipulation can bend a person, turning a son into the taker of his own creator's life. It is a stain, a permanent mistake that cannot be rescued or redeemed by any late repentance. Ultimately, the case closed with harsh sentences behind iron bars, but the aftershocks it left behind are a sobering lesson on the thin boundary between good and evil. When people lose their composure in the face of material temptations and deception, the price to pay is not just freedom, but the entire dignity and peace of a lifetime. If you want to continue following true crime stories recreated based on files and evidence, please like, subscribe, and share the video. Your support will help us continue to bring thoroughly researched crime documentaries that respect the truth.